The metallic chamber of Neutral Station Epsilon gleamed under harsh artificial lights, its sterile surfaces reflecting the tension that crackled between two very different species. Texas stood at the head of the human delegation, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, blue eyes studying the towering figure across the negotiation table with the patience of a man who'd learned to read enemies as easily as friends. The Kha'Vren lead negotiator loomed over the table, obsidian scales catching the light as they shifted with each rattling breath. At 7 feet 2 inches, the reptilian alien's presence was designed to intimidate, and Texas had to admit it was effective. The creature's amber eyes glowed faintly, narrowing to slits as they assessed the humans with undisguised contempt. "So," Texas drawled, his voice carrying the weight of measured authority, "we're here to discuss the Kepler Trade Corridor. Earth's position is simple. Shared access benefits both our peoples." The Kha'Vren's scales clinked as they leaned forward aggressively. "Your kind scrabbles in the dirt of a single world. You dare claim equality with the Kha'Vren hegemony?" Texas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the faint scar across his chin twitching as he controlled his response. His hands remained steady, projecting calm, even as the alien's dismissive tone grated against decades of diplomatic training. 50,000 kilometers away, aboard the cloaked flagship Defiant, Laura paced the bridge with quick, precise steps. Her auburn hair caught the blue glow of tactical displays as she monitored the situation through encrypted channels. The burn scar on her left hand tingled, a familiar sensation when operations hung in the balance. "Comms, what's the status on our friends?" she asked, her voice clipped but warm when addressing her crew. The young comms specialist looked up from his datapad, twitchy fingers still working the controls. Texas is keeping them talking, ma'am. Kha'Vren fleet's holding position at the system's edge, 12 heavy cruisers, standard formation." Laura's green eyes narrowed as she studied the tactical display. The human fleet was smaller, 8 ships total, but she'd positioned them with surgical precision. Each vessel sat cloaked at critical points throughout the system, invisible to Kha'Vren sensors, but ready to reveal themselves at her command. "Captain," she addressed the grizzled fleet captain, who rubbed his temple as he reviewed the deployment. "Are we ready for the show?" "Ready as we'll ever be," he replied gruffly. "Risky play, ma'am. Decloaking could spark a fight." Back in the station's chamber, Texas tilted his head slightly, a signal he was listening intently to the Kha'Vren's demands. The alien's aide hovered nearby, pale yellow eyes darting between the speakers while clutching a small comm device. The smaller Kha'Vren's scales had dulled slightly, and Texas's experienced eye caught the telltale signs of nervousness. "Control's a fragile thing," Texas said quietly, his drawl sharpening. "We're here to talk, not beg. The question is whether you want to build something together or tear it all down." The lead negotiator's amber eyes flickered, and for just a moment, Texas saw something behind the arrogance: uncertainty. The game had begun. The Kha'Vren lead negotiator's claws tapped an impatient rhythm on the metallic table, each strike echoing through the chamber like a countdown to war. Their imposing frame shifted as they leaned back, scales rattling with what Texas recognized as poorly concealed frustration. "The hegemony's terms are non-negotiable," the alien declared, their rattling voice dripping with superiority. "Earth will cede all rights to the Kepler Trade Corridor. Your merchant vessels will submit to our inspections. Your military ships will maintain a minimum distance of 5 light years from our borders." Texas's blue eyes remained steady, though his clasped hands tightened slightly behind his back. The demands were worse than Earth's intelligence had predicted. Complete capitulation disguised as negotiation. His scar twitched as he processed the implications, but his voice remained level. "Those terms sound less like negotiation and more like surrender," he replied, his drawl taking on a sharper edge. "We've come here in good faith, offering partnership. What you're describing is subjugation." The Kha'Vren's aide shifted nervously, their dull gray scales catching the harsh lighting as they hissed softly. Texas noticed the creature's grip on the comm device had tightened, knuckles showing white beneath the scales. Something was off about the smaller alien's behavior, too much anxiety for a simple aide. 50,000 kilometers away, Laura's scarred hand drummed against her thigh as she monitored the tactical display. The human fleet's cloaked formation held perfectly, each ship positioned to create maximum psychological impact when revealed. But timing would be everything. "How's our signal penetration?" she asked the comm specialist, who was hunched over his console with characteristic intensity. "Getting some weird interference," he replied, fingers dancing across the datapad. "Their comm chatters, odd. More encrypted channels than standard diplomatic protocol requires." Laura's green eyes narrowed. In her experience, excessive encryption usually meant someone had something to hide. "Keep monitoring. I want to know what they're really saying." The fleet captain shifted in his chair, broad shoulders tense as he watched the deployment status. "Fleet's holding position, ma'am. Cloaking signatures are stable, but we're burning power. Can't maintain this formation indefinitely." "We won't need to," Laura assured him, though her pacing quickened. "Texas'll keep them talking. We just need to flex at the right moment." Back in the negotiation chamber, the Kha'Vren lead negotiator's amber eyes glowed brighter as they pressed their advantage. "Your species is young, short-lived, and technologically inferior. The hegemony offers you the privilege of existing under our protection. That should be enough." Texas's jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. Decades of diplomacy had taught him to recognize when someone was performing rather than negotiating. The Kha'Vren's arrogance felt rehearsed, as if they were following a script rather than responding to actual diplomatic overtures. "Protection from what?" Texas asked, his voice carrying a deceptive calm. "The only threat I see in this system is the one you're manufacturing." The aide's hissing grew more pronounced, and Texas caught the creature's darting glance toward their comm device. A message had just come through. He was certain of it. The timing was too convenient, the reaction too pronounced. "The hegemony's patience is not infinite," the lead negotiator continued, their scales clicking as they stood to their full intimidating height. "We have schedules to maintain, territories to govern. Your continued existence is already a generous concession." Texas remained seated, projecting calm even as his mind raced. The Kha'Vren were pushing too hard, too fast. Real negotiators would have started with smaller demands, built rapport, established common ground. This felt like theater, a performance designed to justify a predetermined outcome. "Time's a curious thing," he replied, his drawl sharpening. "Rush through it and you miss the important details, like the fact that we're not the weak little species you seem to think we are." Laura's voice crackled through his nearly invisible earpiece. "Phase 1 complete, ready for the show whenever you are." Texas leaned forward slightly, his weathered hands now resting on the table's surface with deliberate calm. His blue eyes fixed on the Kha'Vren lead negotiator with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey, though his expression remained diplomatically neutral. "You know," he said, his drawl taking on a conversational tone, "I've been in a lot of negotiations over the years. Usually when someone's this eager to wrap things up, there's a reason. Clock ticking somewhere?" The lead negotiator's scales rattled more aggressively, amber eyes flickering with what Texas recognized as irritation. "The hegemony's time is valuable. We do not waste it on lengthy deliberations with inferior species." But Texas caught the tell. A slight hesitation before the practiced insult, a momentary glance toward the aide who was now hissing almost continuously. The smaller Kha'Vren's pale yellow eyes darted between speakers, and their grip on the comm device had turned white-knuckled. "Inferior," Texas repeated thoughtfully, tilting his head in that way that signaled deep consideration. "That's interesting phrasing. Usually when someone's truly superior, they don't need to keep saying it." Aboard the Defiant, Laura's scarred hand had begun to itch, a sure sign her instincts were screaming warnings. The comm specialist's fingers flew over his controls, his usual nervous energy amplified by whatever he was discovering in the Kha'Vren transmissions. "Ma'am," he said, his voice tight with excitement and confusion, "I'm picking up multiple encrypted channels, standard diplomatic frequency, but also others. Lots of them." "Others?" Laura stopped pacing, her green eyes sharp with interest. "Yeah, it's like they're running parallel conversations. Some of the encryption's military grade, but there's civilian chatter too. And get this, Some of the signals aren't even coming from the negotiation chamber. Laura's mind raced. Multiple communication streams during a supposedly straightforward negotiation could mean several things, none of them good. Either the Kha'Vren were planning something, or they weren't the unified force they appeared to be. "Captain," she called to the fleet captain, who was now rubbing his temple more vigorously, "what's your read on their fleet positioning?" "Standard formation, but—" He paused, studying the tactical display. "They're spread pretty thin for a show of force, almost like they're expecting trouble from multiple directions." Laura's scar tingled more intensely, or like they're not all on the same page. Back in the negotiation chamber, Texas pressed his advantage. "You keep mentioning the hegemony, but I'm curious. Who exactly are you speaking for? The entire Kha'Vren government? A specific faction? Your military command?" The aide's hissing became sharp, almost panicked, and Texas saw the creature's comm device light up with what looked like an urgent message. The lead negotiator's scales clinked as they shifted uncomfortably. "I speak for the hegemony," they replied, but the response came too quickly, too defensively. "All of it?" Texas pressed, his scar twitching as he sensed weakness. "Because in my experience, when someone claims to speak for everyone, they usually speak for no one." The lead negotiator's amber eyes flared brighter, and their claws scored the table's surface. "You dare question our authority?" "I question vague terms and evasive answers," Texas replied calmly. "You want Earth to cede territory, accept inspections, limit our military movements, but you won't specify who's making these demands or what authority backs them." Laura's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Texas, we're seeing fractured communications on their end. This might not be what it seems." The comm specialist's excited whisper confirmed her suspicions. "Ma'am, I'm breaking through their encryption. There's definitely something weird going on. Some of these signals are contradicting others, like different groups giving different orders." Texas caught the aide's increasingly frantic gestures as more messages flooded their device. The smaller Kha'Vren's scales had dulled to an almost gray color, and their darting eyes showed clear signs of panic. "Here's what I think," Texas said, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "I think someone's pulling strings behind the scenes. I think this unified hegemony you keep talking about might not be as unified as you'd like us to believe." The lead negotiator's tail twitched, a nervous tell Texas filed away for later use. "You know nothing of Kha'Vren politics." "Maybe not," Texas agreed, his blue eyes never leaving the alien's face. "But I know theater when I see it, and right now this feels like a dress rehearsal for a play where nobody's learned their lines." The tension in the chamber had thickened like smoke, and Texas could feel the shift in momentum as clearly as a change in weather. The Kha'Vren lead negotiator's amber eyes now blazed with barely contained fury, their imposing frame trembling with suppressed rage. "Enough of your insolence," the alien snarled, scales rattling like armor in an earthquake. "The hegemony offers Earth one final opportunity. Accept our terms within the next standard hour or face the consequences of your obstinacy." The aide's hissing had become a continuous, anxious whisper, and Texas noticed the creature's comm device was now flashing with what appeared to be urgent priority messages. The smaller Kha'Vren's pale yellow eyes darted between the device and the lead negotiator with increasing desperation. Texas's scar twitched as he absorbed the ultimatum. An hour wasn't negotiation time. It was execution time. His hands remained steady on the table, but his mind was already calculating angles, alternatives, and the precise moment when diplomacy would need to give way to harder truths. "An hour," he repeated, his drawl taking on a dangerous edge. "That's specific. Makes me wonder what happens at the 61-minute mark." 50,000 kilometers away, Laura felt her scarred hand tingle with anticipation. The moment had arrived. The careful choreography she'd spent hours perfecting was about to take center stage. "Captain," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone who'd made her decision, "decloak the Vigilant. Single ship, position 7-7 Alpha." The fleet captain's weathered face tightened with concern. "That'll put us on their sensors, ma'am. No going back after that." "That's the idea," Laura replied, her green eyes fixed on the tactical display. Sometimes you have to show a little teeth to get their attention. The Vigilant, a sleek destroyer that had been hidden in the asteroid field's shadow, shimmered into existence like a predator emerging from tall grass. Its presence on the Kha'Vren sensors would be impossible to ignore, a single human warship perfectly positioned to interdict any aggressive movement toward the station. In the negotiation chamber, the aides' hissing peaked as their comm device erupted with alerts. The smaller Kha'Vren's scales had gone completely gray, and their darting eyes showed unmistakable panic. They whispered something urgent in their native tongue to the lead negotiator, who whirled to face them with barely contained fury. "What is it?" the lead negotiator demanded, their rattling voice carrying an edge of uncertainty for the first time. "Human vessel," the aide whispered, their voice trembling. It appeared from nothing. Our sensors show no others, but if they can hide one ship—" Texas allowed himself a slight smile, the expression transforming his weathered features into something almost predatory. "Ah, you noticed? Good. We weren't sure your sensors were up to the task." The lead negotiator's amber eyes flared as they focused on Texas with new intensity. "You dare bring weapons to a diplomatic meeting?" "I brought options," Texas replied calmly. "Same as you did with that fleet sitting at the system's edge. Difference is, mine are better hidden." Laura's voice crackled through his earpiece. "One fish in the net. How'd they like the surprise?" The Kha'Vren lead negotiator's scales clicked rapidly as they processed this new information. Their previous arrogance had been replaced by something far more dangerous, the focused attention of a predator who'd suddenly realized they might be facing another predator. "One ship," they said, their voice carrying forced confidence, "against the might of the hegemony fleet." Texas's blue eyes remained steady, but his scarred hand moved to rest lightly on the table, a gesture that somehow conveyed both calm and readiness. "One ship you can see, but then again you didn't see that one until we wanted you to." The aide's comm device flashed again, and this time the message seemed to galvanize the smaller Kha'Vren into action. They hissed something urgent and lengthy in their native tongue, their pale yellow eyes wide with what Texas recognized as genuine fear. "What's wrong?" Texas asked conversationally. "Your backup plan hitting a snag." The lead negotiator's tail twitched violently, and for the first time since negotiations began, they seemed uncertain. "The hegemony's position remains unchanged." "Does it?" Texas pressed, his drawl sharpening. "Because your friend there looks like they just got some very interesting news. Bad news, judging by the color of their scales." Laura's tactical display showed the Kha'Vren fleet beginning to shift formation, their previously confident positioning now showing signs of uncertainty. The appearance of one human ship had apparently triggered a cascade of doubt about what else might be hidden in the system. "The hour ticks down," Texas observed, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "But I'm starting to think that deadline wasn't your idea in the first place." The Kha'Vren aide's comm device had become a constellation of flashing alerts, and Texas watched with growing fascination as the smaller alien's panic reached a crescendo. The creature's scales had gone completely gray, and their hissing had devolved into what sounded like desperate whispers in their native tongue. "Something's wrong," Texas said, his drawl taking on a tone of mock concern. "Your aide seems distressed. Maybe you should take that call." The lead negotiator's amber eyes flickered between Texas and their increasingly agitated subordinate. For the first time since negotiations began, the imposing alien seemed genuinely uncertain, their previous script apparently no longer adequate for the situation. Aboard the Defiant, the comm specialist's fingers flew over his controls with the intensity of someone who'd struck digital gold. His pale skin had flushed with excitement, and his usual nervous energy had transformed into focused determination. "Ma'am, I'm breaking through their encryption," he reported, his voice tight with discovery, "and it's not what we thought." Laura stopped pacing, her green eyes snapping to the young specialist. "Explain." "The signals aren't coming from a unified command structure. There's at least 3 different groups sending conflicting orders. Maybe more." His twitchy fingers highlighted data streams on his display. "Look at this. One group's ordering aggressive action, another's calling for withdrawal, and a third, A third is telling them to stick to some kind of predetermined script. Laura's scarred hand clenched into a fist. A script? Yes, ma'am, like they're supposed to say specific things, make specific demands, regardless of how we respond, but the scriptwriters aren't the same group giving military orders. The fleet captain rubbed his temple more vigorously, his weathered face creasing with concern. Sounds like we're not dealing with the official Kha'Vren government. No, Laura agreed, her mind racing through the implications. We're dealing with a faction, maybe multiple factions using the negotiation as cover for something else. She activated her comm to Texas. The Kha'Vren delegation isn't speaking for their government. They're puppets, and someone else is pulling the strings. In the negotiation chamber, Texas absorbed this information with the practiced calm of someone who'd learned to adapt to changing circumstances. His blue eyes fixed on the aide's comm device, now flashing so rapidly it resembled a strobe light. "You know what I think?" Texas said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "I think you're not really in charge here. I think someone else is feeding you lines, and right now they're panicking because their carefully planned script just went off the rails." The lead negotiator's scales rattled with what Texas recognized as genuine fear. You know nothing of Kha'Vren politics." "Maybe not," Texas agreed, "but I know a puppet show when I see one, and right now your puppet masters are having a very animated discussion about what to do next." The aide's hissing reached a crescendo as they finally answered their comm device. The conversation was brief but intense, conducted in rapid-fire Kha'Vren that sounded more like an argument than a briefing. When it ended, the smaller alien scales had gone completely pale. "Let me guess," Texas said, his scarred jaw set in an expression of grim satisfaction. "Your handlers just realized that their grand plan has a few holes in it." Laura's voice crackled through his earpiece again. "Texas, we're seeing massive signal traffic between multiple Kha'Vren factions. Whatever's happening, it's not part of their original plan." The lead negotiator's amber eyes flared with desperate anger. "The hegemony's demands remain." "The hegemony's demands were written by someone who isn't even in this room," Texas interrupted, his drawl taking on a cutting edge. "Someone who doesn't have the authority to make them and doesn't have the power to enforce them." The aide whispered something urgent to their superior, and Texas caught the word that made everything click into place. "Rogue." "Ah," Texas said, his blue eyes lighting up with understanding. "Rogue faction. Should have seen that coming. So whose authority are you actually operating under? Because I'm betting it's not the legitimate Kha'Vren government." The lead negotiator's scales clinked as they shifted uncomfortably, their previous arrogance crumbling in the face of exposure. "Aye, the situation is more complex than you understand." "I understand enough," Texas replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "I understand that we're not dealing with official representatives. I understand that someone's using this negotiation as cover for their own agenda, and I understand that your puppet masters just realized they've been outmaneuvered." Laura's tactical display showed the Kha'Vren fleet beginning to break formation, their previously coordinated positioning dissolving into what looked like factional disagreement. The appearance of human ships had apparently triggered a cascade of recriminations and conflicting orders. "The hour you mentioned," Texas said, his scarred hand tapping the table with deliberate rhythm, "that wasn't a negotiation deadline. That was a timeline for whatever your real employers are planning. And right now they're scrambling because their carefully orchestrated crisis just became a real one." The Kha'Vren lead negotiator's composure had completely shattered, their imposing frame now trembling with barely contained panic rather than rage. The aide's comm device had become a cacophony of conflicting signals, and Texas could see the exact moment when the smaller alien received orders that contradicted everything they'd been told before. "You want to know what I think happened here?" Texas said, his voice carrying the conversational tone of someone solving a particularly interesting puzzle. "I think a rogue faction in your government decided to manufacture a crisis, use the trade route dispute as justification for aggressive action. Problem is they needed official-looking representatives to make it seem legitimate. The lead negotiator's amber eyes flickered with what Texas recognized as genuine fear. You cannot prove. Can't I? Texas interrupted, his blue eyes fixed on the aide's frantic attempts to manage multiple communication streams. Your friend there is getting orders from at least 3 different sources. That's not how unified governments operate. Aboard the Defiant, Laura's team had transformed the bridge into a digital battleground. The comms specialist's fingers flew over his controls with the intensity of someone fighting for humanity's survival, while displays showed the increasingly chaotic Kha'Vren communication network. "Ma'am, I'm isolating the rogue faction's signals," he reported, his voice tight with concentration. "They're using military encryption, but it's not standard Kha'Vren military protocols. This is private, faction-specific stuff." Laura's scarred hand drummed against her thigh as she processed the implications. "Can you jam their communications?" "Working on it," the specialist replied, his nervous energy now channeled into surgical precision. "If I can isolate their frequency bands, I can create enough interference to cut them off from their puppets." The fleet captain leaned forward in his chair, his weathered face creased with concern. "That's an act of war, ma'am. Electronic warfare against a diplomatic delegation." "They're not a diplomatic delegation," Laura replied, her green eyes sharp with determination. "They're terrorists wearing diplomatic clothes, and terrorists don't get the protection of diplomatic immunity." She activated her comm to Texas. "We're about to cut the puppet strings. Be ready for them to either panic or get very honest very quickly." In the negotiation chamber, Texas pressed his advantage with the relentless persistence of someone who'd learned to read enemies like books. The aide's increasingly frantic attempts to manage multiple communication streams had become a telltale sign of an operation falling apart. "Here's what I think," Texas said, his drawl taking on the weight of absolute certainty. "Your rogue faction promised you official backing that doesn't exist. They told you the legitimate government was on board, but they're not. And right now your handlers are realizing that their carefully planned crisis is about to expose them." The lead negotiator's scales clinked as they shifted uncomfortably. "The hegemony's position—" "The hegemony doesn't know you're here," Texas interrupted, his scarred jaw set in an expression of grim satisfaction. "At least, not the real hegemony. You're operating under stolen authority, manufactured credentials, and forged orders." The aide's hissing reached a crescendo as their comm device suddenly went silent. The smaller aliens' pale yellow eyes went wide with panic as they realized their lifeline to their handlers had been severed. "Connection problems?" Texas asked conversationally. "That's unfortunate. Looks like you're going to have to think for yourselves now." Laura's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Communication disruption successful. They're cut off from their puppet masters." The lead negotiator's amber eyes flared with desperate fury. You have no right to interfere with diplomatic communications." "Diplomatic communications between legitimate representatives," Texas corrected, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "What you've been doing is coordinating with terrorists. Big difference." The aide's scales had gone completely pale, and their darting eyes showed the unmistakable signs of someone who just realized they were completely on their own. Without their handlers feeding them lines, they seemed lost, uncertain, and increasingly desperate. "The hour you mentioned," Texas continued, his tone shifting to something almost gentle, "that wasn't a negotiation deadline. That was a timeline for some kind of false flag operation. Your faction needed Earth to reject the terms so they could justify whatever aggressive action they had planned." The lead negotiator's tail twitched violently, and for the first time since negotiations began, they seemed genuinely uncertain about what to say next. Their previous script had been discarded, their handlers were silent, and their carefully orchestrated crisis was rapidly becoming a real diplomatic disaster. "But here's the thing about puppet shows," Texas said, his blue eyes fixed on the increasingly desperate aliens. "When you cut the strings, the puppets either fall down or learn to stand on their own. So what's it going to be?" Laura's tactical display showed the Kha'Vren fleet beginning to break apart, their previously coordinated positioning dissolving into what looked like factional disagreement. Ships were peeling away from the main formation, apparently responding to different orders or simply choosing to distance themselves from whatever was happening. The legitimate Kha'Vren government is probably wondering why their fleet is scattered across the system, Texas observed, and they're probably very interested in knowing who authorized this little adventure. The silence in the negotiation chamber stretched like a taut wire, broken only by the aides' increasingly desperate attempts to reestablish communication with their handlers. The smaller Kha'Vren's pale yellow eyes darted between their dead comm device and the lead negotiator, seeking guidance that was no longer coming. Then, like a dam bursting, the lead negotiator's carefully maintained facade finally cracked. "You have no idea what you've done," they snarled, their amber eyes blazing with fury and desperation. "The hegemony grows weak, corrupted by peacemongering fools who would rather trade than conquer. The old ways, the strong ways, must be preserved." Texas's scar twitched as he absorbed this admission, his blue eyes narrowing with the focus of a hunter who'd finally flushed his prey. There it is, not the official hegemony at all, a faction that thinks the current government is too soft. The aides' hissing had become a continuous, anxious whisper as they finally found their voice. "The Trade Council grows fat on commerce while our warrior traditions die. Someone must act to preserve what makes us strong." "By manufacturing a war," Texas said, his drawl taking on a dangerous edge. "By creating a crisis that would justify the old ways. Problem is, you needed legitimate-looking representatives to make it seem official." Aboard the Defiant, Laura's team monitored the breakdown with the intensity of surgeons performing a delicate operation. The Kha'Vren fleet's formation had completely dissolved, with individual ships apparently receiving conflicting orders or simply choosing to maintain safe distances from whatever was happening. "Ma'am," the comms specialist reported, his fingers still dancing over his controls, "I'm picking up massive signal traffic between legitimate Kha'Vren military commanders. They're trying to figure out what's happening and who authorized this operation." Laura's scarred hand clenched into a fist. "Any sign of the rogue faction trying to reestablish contact?" "They're trying, but we're jamming their frequencies pretty effectively. Some breakthrough chatter, but it's panicked, disorganized stuff. Their operations falling apart." The fleet captain rubbed his temple more vigorously, his weathered face creasing with concern. "What about their fleet? Are they still a threat?" "Hard to say," Laura replied, her green eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Half of them are probably legitimate military following orders they thought came from high command. The other half, well, they're about to find out they've been had." She activated her comm to Texas. "The rogue faction's communication network is collapsing. Their fleet's breaking apart. Time to press the advantage." In the negotiation chamber, Texas leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just solved a particularly challenging puzzle. The Kha'Vren lead negotiator's admission had transformed the entire dynamic of the meeting. "So, let me get this straight," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "A faction of military hardliners decided the current government was too peaceful. They manufactured a crisis over the trade route, stole official credentials, and sent you here to make demands they knew Earth couldn't accept. Then they could point to our aggression as justification for a return to the old ways." The lead negotiators' scales clinked as they shifted uncomfortably, their previous arrogance completely evaporated. The hegemony must be strong. The galaxy respects only power. "The galaxy respects competence," Texas corrected, his blue eyes fixed on the increasingly desperate alien. "And right now, your faction's looking pretty incompetent. Their carefully planned crisis just exposed them as the rebels they really are." The aide's comm device flickered back to life for a brief moment, and the smaller Kha'Vren's face lit up with desperate hope. But the connection lasted only seconds before dissolving back into static, leaving them more isolated than before. "Connection problems?" Texas asked conversationally. "That's what happens when you try to run a shadow operation. Eventually the shadows get too dark to see through." Laura's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Legitimate Kha'Vren military commanders are demanding explanations. Their government's about to find out they've got a rogue faction problem." The lead negotiator's amber eyes flared with desperate fury. You think you've won? The warrior spirit cannot be destroyed by cutting communication lines. No, Texas agreed, his scarred jaw set in an expression of grim satisfaction, but it can be channeled. The question is whether you want to be remembered as patriots who tried to preserve their culture or as traitors who nearly started a war based on lies. The aide's hissing had become a low, continuous whisper of panic. Without their handlers to guide them, they seemed lost, uncertain, and increasingly aware that their carefully orchestrated crisis had become a very real diplomatic disaster. Your faction wanted to preserve the old ways, Texas continued, his voice taking on a more conciliatory tone. I can respect that, but the old ways don't have to include starting wars based on manufactured crises. There are other ways to prove strength. The lead negotiator's tail twitched violently, and for the first time since negotiations began, they seemed genuinely uncertain about what to do next. Their script had been discarded, their handlers were silent, and their carefully planned operation was rapidly becoming a liability rather than an asset. What do you propose? They asked, their voice carrying the weight of someone who just realized they were completely out of options. Laura's moment had arrived. Standing at the center of the Defiance Bridge, she felt the familiar tingle in her scarred hand that always preceded the kind of tactical maneuver that would either secure victory or trigger catastrophe. Her green eyes swept across the tactical display, taking in the scattered Kha'Vren fleet, the positioning of her own cloaked ships, and the perfect opportunity to demonstrate humanity's true capabilities. All ships, she commanded, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone who'd planned this moment down to the second, execute Revelation Protocol on my mark. The fleet captain's weathered face tightened with concern, but he nodded. On your mark, ma'am. Laura took a deep breath, the scent of ozone and recycled air filling her lungs. This wasn't just about showing off, it was about rewriting the narrative, about proving that humanity wasn't a species to be trifled with, nor one that could be easily deceived. Mark? Across the Kepler system, a symphony of light erupted. 8 human warships, previously invisible, decloaked simultaneously. They didn't just appear, they unfurled. The Defiant, a heavy cruiser, expanded its dorsal and ventral fins, revealing arrays of previously hidden weaponry and sensor suites. Destroyers like the Vigilant extended their wingtips, transforming from sleek darts into aggressive multi-vectored platforms. Frigates and corvettes, smaller but equally potent, deployed their own unique configurations, each designed to maximize combat effectiveness and project an undeniable image of power. The Kha'Vren tactical displays, already in disarray from the comms blackout, exploded with new, overwhelming data. What they had believed to be a single, isolated human warship was now a fully deployed, technologically advanced fleet, each vessel radiating an energy signature that screamed apex predator. The sheer audacity of their hidden presence, the sudden, synchronized revelation, sent shockwaves through the already fractured Kha'Vren command structure. On the Defiance Bridge, the comm specialist, whose nervous energy had transformed into a laser-like focus, let out a whoop of triumph. Ma'am, their fleet's in full retreat. Rogue faction elements are scattering like dust motes. Legitimate Kha'Vren commanders are broadcasting emergency hails, demanding to know what the hell just happened. Laura allowed herself a grim smile. Tell them to direct their inquiries to Neutral Station Epsilon. Texas will be happy to explain. Back in the negotiation chamber, the sudden, blinding flash of light visible even through the station's reinforced viewports, followed by the chaotic blips on the Kha'Vren aide's now useless comm device, confirmed Laura's actions. The lead negotiator, who had been stammering about the hegemony's demands, froze mid-sentence, their amber eyes wide with a terror Texas had never seen before. What was that? The lead negotiator rasped, their voice devoid of its usual arrogance. Texas leaned forward, his voice calm but laced with an undeniable edge of authority. That, my friend, was a demonstration of what happens when you try to play games with humanity. He gestured vaguely towards the viewport. That's our fleet, the one you didn't see, the one that was here all along. The aide, whose scales had gone from pale to an almost translucent gray, whimpered, pointing a trembling claw at the viewport. They were invisible. Our sensors, they detected nothing. Exactly, Texas said, his drawl returning to its conversational yet menacing rhythm. We're very good at hiding, and we're even better at finding things that try to hide from us. He fixed his gaze on the lead negotiator. Your rogue faction wanted a war. They wanted to prove that the old ways were superior. Well, they just got a very expensive lesson in modern warfare. The lead negotiator's imposing frame seemed to shrink, their shoulders slumping. This is impossible. The hegemony's intelligence was fed a pack of lies by your own people, Texas finished for them. The same people who sent you here as pawns in their little power play. They underestimated us. They underestimated our technology, and most importantly, they underestimated our willingness to defend ourselves and our friends. He paused, letting the implications sink in. The silence in the chamber was thick with the weight of shattered illusions. Then a new voice crackled through Texas's earpiece, clear and authoritative. It was Admiral J. Call, the true commander of the Kha'Vren fleet, whose communications Laura's team had been diligently unjamming and routing. Human negotiator, this is Admiral J. Call of the Kha'Vren hegemony fleet. We are receiving reports of unauthorized fleet movements and a complete breakdown of command and control among our forward elements. What is the meaning of this? Texas allowed a small, satisfied smirk to play on his lips. Admiral J. Call, this is Texas. I believe you're experiencing what we call a rogue faction problem. Your diplomatic delegation here has been operating under false pretenses, attempting to provoke a conflict with Earth. A stunned silence followed from the other end. Then Jekal's voice, now laced with barely suppressed fury, boomed. Explain yourself, human. Gladly, Admiral, Texas replied, his eyes never leaving the lead negotiator, who was now visibly trembling. It appears a group within your military, unhappy with the current peaceful policies of the hegemony, decided to manufacture a crisis over the Kepler trade corridor. They sent these individuals here, posing as official representatives, to issue demands they knew we couldn't accept. Their goal was to use our rejection as justification for a return to aggressive expansion. The lead negotiator let out a strangled hiss of protest, but Texas ignored them. Unfortunately for them, we detected their little charade. We've just demonstrated our capabilities, and frankly, Admiral, your rogue elements are currently scattering like startled space mice. Jekal's voice was tight with controlled rage. I see, and your fleet's sudden appearance was a demonstration? Precisely, Texas confirmed. A demonstration of our commitment to peace, backed by the undeniable reality that we are not a species to be trifled with. We prefer diplomacy, Admiral, but we are always prepared for alternatives. The Admiral's next words were directed not at Texas, but at the rogue elements of his own fleet, broadcast across all Kha'Vren military frequencies. The language was harsh, guttural, filled with commands for immediate stand-down and accountability. The lead negotiator and their aide flinched, their scales dulling even further as they realized the extent of their exposure. Human Texas, Admiral J. Call's voice returned, now calmer but still firm. I understand the situation. My apologies for the actions of these misguided individuals. The hegemony will deal with this internal matter swiftly and decisively. Regarding the Kepler trade corridor, I believe we have much to discuss, legitimate discussions this time. I agree, Admiral, Texas said, a genuine smile finally gracing his lips. Earth's offer of shared access still stands. We believe in mutual benefit, not subjugation, and we're always open to building something together rather than tearing it all down. The negotiation chamber, which had been a crucible of tension, now felt strangely calm, almost anticlimactic. The lead negotiator and their aide sat slumped, their arrogance replaced by a profound sense of defeat. Their carefully constructed illusion had been shattered, and they were left with the stark reality of their failure. Texas turned his attention back to the two Kha'Vren, his expression softening slightly. So what's it going to be? Do you want to be remembered as the fools who nearly started a war based on lies, or as the first Kha'Vren to truly embrace a new path? The lead negotiators slowly lifted their head, their amber eyes meeting Texas's. The fury was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. We followed orders. We believed. You believed a lie, Texas finished gently, but it's not too late to choose the truth. The legitimate hegemony will be looking for answers. You can be part of the solution or part of the problem. Your choice. The aide, still trembling, managed to stammer, What do you mean, solution? Tell the truth, Texas said simply. Expose the rogue faction. Help Admiral Jakal restore order. Show your government that not all of their old ways are worth preserving, but that strength can also be found in honesty and cooperation. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. The galaxy is changing, my friends. Humanity isn't here to conquer. We're here to build. And we're looking for partners who understand that true power comes from unity, not manufactured conflict. On the Defiant, Laura watched the Kha'Vren fleet's complete disarray. The rogue elements were either surrendering to legitimate hegemony forces or fleeing into deep space. The main Kha'Vren fleet, now under Admiral Jakal's direct command, was slowly re-establishing a defensive perimeter, but this time it was clear they were wary of their own internal issues, not of the humans. Comms, open a secure channel to Admiral Jakal, Laura ordered. Let's offer them some technical assistance in tracking down their remaining rogue elements, a gesture of goodwill. The fleet captain looked at her, a hint of admiration in his gruff expression. Playing nice now, ma'am. Laura smiled. Always, Captain, but sometimes you have to show them the stick before they'll appreciate the carrot. Days later, the Kepler system was a hub of activity, but of a very different kind. Human and legitimate Kha'Vren vessels moved freely, engaged in joint patrols and the painstaking process of identifying and apprehending the remaining rogue faction members. Neutral Station Epsilon, once a stage for a manufactured crisis, had become the unlikely venue for genuine diplomatic progress. Texas sat across from Admiral Jakal, the imposing Kha'Vren now radiating a quiet dignity rather than aggressive arrogance. The lead negotiator and their aide, having chosen to cooperate, were providing crucial intelligence to both human and Kha'Vren authorities, their scales slowly regaining their natural hue as their fear subsided. Your species is full of surprises, human Texas, Admiral Jakal admitted, a faint rumble in his chest that Texas now recognized as a form of amusement. We had underestimated you greatly. Your revelation protocol was effective. Texas chuckled. We aim to please, Admiral, and to make sure everyone understands that peace isn't weakness. The new treaty, drafted over several intensive days of negotiation, was a testament to the unexpected alliance forged in the crucible of near conflict. It established clear trade routes, joint security protocols, and a framework for future cooperation between Earth and the legitimate Kha'Vren hegemony. The Kepler trade corridor, once a flashpoint, was now a symbol of shared prosperity. The rogue faction, stripped of their authority and exposed by their own former pawns, was systematically dismantled. Their leaders were apprehended, their networks disrupted, and their dangerous ideology discredited within the hegemony. The crisis, intended to plunge the galaxy into war, had instead strengthened the legitimate Kha'Vren government and opened the door to a new era of interstellar relations. Laura, having overseen the successful resolution of the fleet standoff, returned to Earth a celebrated hero. Her scarred hand no longer tingled with anticipation of conflict, but with the quiet satisfaction of a mission accomplished. The Defiant and her sister ships, their Revelation Protocol now a legend, stood as silent guardians of a newly forged peace. Texas, ever the diplomat, remained at Neutral Station Epsilon for a time, helping to solidify the new agreements and build trust between the two species. He watched as Kha'Vren and human engineers began collaborating on joint projects, as trade vessels from both empires traversed the Kepler corridor without fear, and as the whispers of war faded into the hum of commerce and cooperation. One evening, as he looked out at the distant stars from his personal quarters on the station, Texas received a secure message from Admiral Jakal. It was a simple message, just 2 words, "Thank you." Texas smiled, a deep, contented smile that reached his blue eyes. The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place, but today, humanity had made it a little bit safer, a little bit more hopeful. The old ways of conquest and deception were slowly giving way to new possibilities, built on understanding, respect, and the undeniable truth that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in the size of your fleet, but in the wisdom of your choices. The story of Earth's first true encounter with the wider galaxy had ended not in fire, but in the quiet, steady glow of a new dawn.